And so we end this
Welcome
book
to
of
Believing
Jeremiah
the Word
on this
with
note
author
of
and pastor
judgment.
Dan Shuck. This program is
Does
a
it seem like a
ministry
downer
of Calvary
to you to
Chapel,
end on this note
Chambersburg,
of
and
judgment
Chambersburg,
and this
Pennsylvania.
finality
Here's what's
of,
coming up
of
in today's
Jerusalem being
message.
purged and cleansed? Well, I tell you, without the judgment of the wicked, there can be no salvation. Think about that for a second. What is your salvation if the wicked aren't judged and separated? How good can your salvation be if the wicked is still there? Don't they have to be judged and go away? Right? And we see these earthly pictures of this happening. So without this separation of evil from righteousness, there can be no salvation. Judgment is good. That's the point I'm making. Judgment is good.
In this final chapter in the book of the prophet of Jeremiah, we examine a historical appendix written 25 years later by an unknown author. Some scholars consider this to be a possible intro to the book of Lamentations, also written by Jeremiah. Earlier in the scriptures, in Jeremiah 32, Jeremiah prophesied the events chronicled here, with the chapter focusing more on himself. However, this author, with their inclusion to the story, felt the need to tell how the fall of Jerusalem played out from the perspective of the people. Now here's Pastor Dan in the book of Jeremiah as he continues his message, Sealing Their Fate.
So all of this detailed list of the things that Babylon took from the temple itself, all of these treasures and blessings from God are now spoiled and are now taken from them and taken into the hands of the Babylonians. But I really think it's important to notice something here. Many of these things are small, right? There's these pots and shovels and things, and they're small, right? But back in verse 17, there's a very, very interesting note here. In verse 17, it said, when it was talking about the giant bronze washing pot, or sea, it calls it, and it says in verse 17, they shattered him. They shattered him and carried him away. They weren't doing it. They didn't take them for their self-value. They didn't take these implements because, whoa, this is the way you worship God. This is the way you honor God. Let's set this up back in Babylon and let's worship God. No, they didn't take these things for their self-value, but they took them for their value as trophies, right? They took them as a trophy of their power and as the substance that they could, sort of like the resale value. Don't you find an amazing picture of exactly the way the enemy comes into your life and tries to destroy and take away what is intended for God's purposes, and he just wants it for resale value? That's exactly what Satan does to us. He doesn't want your obedience because of your self-value, because you're made in the image of God and you have special purpose as a special creation made to represent God. That's not why Satan wants you in his service. He wants you as a trophy of his power. He wants your resale value. He wants to be able to prop you up and say, look at this, look what I got. He doesn't want you to succeed in the way that you're supposed to. He just wants to have that power over you, to throw it in God's face. You're not even something Satan wants. He just wants to throw you in God's face, like, look what I got. That's the same thing Babylon wants to do. They just want to take it back as trophies of, look what we got. Look at all this power we got. Look at all this silver and gold we have. What a picture of what the devil does, right? So Nebuchadnezzar, in this retribution against the temple, this is ultimately what seals his fate. And we read about that in chapter 50 and 51 of Jeremiah, is because he came against the temple and he did all of this to the temple. That sealed his fate, and that he would be judged. And there's another one, by the way. Wait till we get to the book of Daniel. Do you know the story of Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel, where the Lord drives him out to be like a wild beast for a period of time? And then he comes back and he confesses Christ when he comes back to a sane mind. There's another one that through this trial at the end of his life may have come to Christ. He might pop around the corner at you in heaven. You'll be like, whoa, Nebuchadnezzar, how did you get here? Because I believed in that fourth one in the fire. I'm getting ahead of myself. Wait till we get to Daniel. Some of you know that story, right? How many people were in that fire in Daniel? There was 4. Don't let anybody tell you there was 3. And that's right. Don't let anybody tell you there was 3. There was always a 4th one in there. See, I'm giving you homework. This is subtle hints. Like, there's some good homework. Go read some of that, right? All right, we looked at Zedekiah. We looked at Nebuchadnezzar. We go to verse 24. I want to look at another one. It's these ungodly leaders in Israel, and their fate is sealed by religiosity. Religiosity. They couldn't break away from these traditions of men. It's just a short little section here, verse 24 through 30, that we look at these other leaders in Israel. Verse 24, the captain of the guard, that's Nebuzaradan, he took Sariah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, with the 3 doorkeepers of the temple, and from the city he took one official, who was the overseer of the men of war, and he took 7 of the king's advisors who were found in the city, and he took the scribe of the commander of the army who mustered the people of the land, and also 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the midst of the city. And in verse 26, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them and led them to the king of Babylon in Riblah, up at that staging ground. In verse 27, then the king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah went into exile from its land. So these were all leaders in Judah. They were all strong men. Many of them were military men or priests. He's taking the strength of the nation, the military strength, the religious strength of the nation. These strong men would have revolted against Babylon. So does this seem harsh to you, that he would kill them like this? Well, again, I want to bring you over to 2 Chronicles at the end of the historical account of this, and I want to give you some context to this from 2 Chronicles 36, verse 14 through verse 16. Furthermore, all of the leaders of the priests and the people, this is who we're talking about, they were very unfaithful, following all the abominations of the nations, and they defiled the house of Yahweh, which he had set apart as holy in Jerusalem. And Yahweh, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by the hand of his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his habitation. But they what? Continually mocked the messengers that God sent, despising his words and scoffed at his prophets. And the wrath of Yahweh arose against his people until there was no remedy. I think sometimes you read in the scripture and you're like, oh, that's harsh. They got killed. And then you read this and you read the context and you remember these people were given so many opportunities and they mocked and they laughed. I don't need the Lord. I have everything I need. I am a man of war in the city of God. I'm safe until this. And they mocked. And this is why their judgment comes so harshly, because they continually rejected the Lord and all of his servants that were sent to them. So fascinating that Jeremiah was the one called the traitor. And yet he always told them the hard truth, no matter what it cost him. Do you remember all the things Jeremiah's gone through in this book? Thrown into pit, thrown into that pit, pulled up, put down, having his, hey, write this out, have it burned, just all this stuff. He was the one looked at as the traitor, and in the end, there is redemption for Jeremiah, and all of these leaders that mocked are the ones that have their life come to an end. And now, finally here, verse 28 about these men. Verse 28, these are the people whom Nebuchadnezzar took away into exile in the 7th year. There was 3,023 Jews, and in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, 832 persons. He's recounting how many people from each of these 3 waves. We've talked about that, right? And in verse 30, in the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, took away into exile 745 Jewish people. So there was 4,600 people in all. And so we have the numbers all together. Verse 28 recounts that there was 3,023 people that were taken captive in 605 BC at that first wave, including Daniel and the 3 boys. right? And then in the second wave, it tells us there in verse 29, 597 BC, that there was these 832 people taken captive, and one of them, we know his name, Ezekiel. And then finally, the third wave, there was 745 people taken captive. So there are the leaders of the people judged for their religiosity and refusing to turn to the truth that Jeremiah gave them of the Lord. Now, there's a few verses left, and I really believe we have another person to think about here. Not just a person, Jehoiachin, but Jehoiachin represented the lineage of the kings. And something happens where the lineage of the kings from David to Solomon down through, it gets cut off. And there's a mention of it here, and I want to end with that. And so when we pick up in verse 31, we're going to talk about the sealing of the fate of the earthly kingship of Israel. And its fate is sealed by this repetitive rebellion, king after king after king. Verse 31. Now it happened in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month on the 25th day of the month, that Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and brought him out of prison. Before I even continue, I want to set the historical stage here. We've been reading about the moment of Jerusalem's final fall. The king was who? Zedekiah. The Babylonian king that invaded was Nebuchadnezzar. Right? And now, this final little appendage, it backs us, it reminds us of the king that was on the throne before Zedekiah. Immediately before Zedekiah, Jehoiachin was on the throne for only 3 months. Okay? Now, what is the time period of this verse here in verse 31? It's actually way after the fall. Okay? Babylon's already fallen. Where's Jehoiachin been? He's been in prison in Babylon. Jehoiachin's in prison in Babylon while Zedekiah and Israel falls. Okay, and then Nebuchadnezzar's there. Nebuchadnezzar dies later on. Who takes over? The very next king that takes over in Babylon is Evil-Merodach. And Evil-Merodach, what he decides is, I'm going to go to my prisons and I'm going to lift up Jehoiachin, this former king of Israel. I'm going to lift him up out of prison. I'm going to restore him. I'm going to bring him back to a certain measure of power. So that's the scenery here in verse 31. This is way after the fall of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar has already died and the next king is in charge. Let me continue in verse 32. And he, that's Evil-Merodach, spoke to him, Jehoiachin, good words. And he set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence continually all the days of his life. For, in verse 34, his allowance, a continual allowance, was given him by the king of Babylon, which was a daily portion of all the days of his life until the day of his death. Now, this Jehoiachin, very fascinating. When you read through the Kings and the Chronicles, even through Jeremiah, we're not given a lot of detail about Jehoiachin. His father Jehoiakim was the king for 11 years. He comes on the scene. He reigns for only 3 months before Babylon takes him and puts Zedekiah on the throne. Okay? We don't know much about this Jehoiachin, but there's a couple of very powerful remarks about him. First of all, I want you to know that when he was the king for those 3 short months, he was only 18 years old. He was only 18. When his father got deposed from Babylon, he's there. And now here he is being raised up in prison. Way later on, he's 55 years old at this time. He's spent the majority of his life in exile in mostly a Babylonian prison. It's interesting that Jehoiachin's earthly prosperity meant nothing but because of his spiritual poverty. This man, we know nothing good about him spiritually. In fact, you may remember that this Jehoiachin is the one where God told Jeremiah in Jeremiah chapter 22 to write about Jehoiachin and say, write this man childless In other words, consider nobody that comes from his lineage. The Lord said through Jeremiah, I won't let anybody of his lineage rule on my throne. In fact, after Jehoiachin, the next king was Zedekiah. Zedekiah, I'm not remembering right now. He was either Jehoiachin's uncle or his great uncle, but he was in the line of David, but he was not Jehoiachin's son. He was only 18, of course. And so this is how upset the Lord was at Jehoiachin. I think sometimes we look at these things and we say, well, how in the world could the Lord be upset with this 18-year-old so badly? Well, the Lord doesn't look at things like that. He looks at the end from the beginning. He knows everything about you from the day you were born until the day you're going to die. He knows it all. And he knows how to make an accurate judgment of who you are. And I believe even this time in Babylon, this loyalty that he gives to Babylon, to be raised up in Babylon to the position of a king, a sub-king. He's serving Babylon, guys. He's not serving the Lord. He's serving Babylon. And I believe the Lord knew that, even all those years ago, when he had Jeremiah pronounce that curse on him. So Jehoiachin served Babylon better than he ever served the Lord, or Israel for that matter. In fact, in Second Chronicles chapter 36, and also in excavations at the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, which is a famous archaeological find, it gives us evidence that Jehoiachin's rise back to earthly power. So it's not just that it's stated here and also in other parts of the Bible, but even that archaeology of the Ishtar Gate shows us an inscription of Jehoiachin and how he rose up to this high prominent position in Babylon. We know somebody else that rose up to a high prominent position in Babylon too, don't we? We didn't get to that book yet. The book of Daniel. And we see Daniel rising up to this great position under Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. And then even later under the Medo-Persian Empire, Daniel was one of the three rulers in the land. But so we have this case where you have Jehoiachin raised up in Babylon to a place of power as a scoundrel who never served the Lord, didn't even know what it means. And then you have Daniel raised up in this heathen country of Babylon to a prominent position, and yet it matters how you get there. And we know and we see one of them was blessed for it, and one of them, Jehoiachin, is cursed for it. Literally cursed. So the book ends with this note on Jehoiachin, and I believe it's because of his impact on the Messiah to come. Because the lineage of the Messiah was to come through David, right? It was never promised to come through David's son Solomon, but it was promised to come through David. And as we see all of these earthly kings on the throne, everybody's assuming, well, that's where the Messiah is going to come through. He's going to come through the king, and then the king's son, and the king's son. Until it gets to Jehoiachin, and God says, write that man childless. I will not have anybody of his lineage ruling on my throne. And so I believe that's why this book of Jeremiah ends with this, because it's all about the Messiah. He's pointing us to this ended the earthly kingship. This man Jehoiachin ended the earthly kingship. And God has to go through another son of David to bring the Messiah. Right? We've gone through that. I won't do the whole thing again, but we know that it was supposed in the days of Jesus that Jesus came through his earthly father Joseph, and Joseph was a descendant of the kingly line, but God cursed that one. Jesus wasn't the son of Joseph, was he? In any way. He was the son of Mary. He was the son of a virgin. He was the seed of a woman. Unlike anybody else that's ever lived. He was through Mary, not Joseph at all. And Mary came through the spiritual lineage of David, through David's son Nathan. And so we know that that's where Jesus comes from, to be the rightful heir to the throne and the kingdom that is to come, the kingdom that will be established on this earth. He will reign. And so we end with this Jehoiachin and the whole earthly kingship being judged for their rebellion. And it's done. The whole earthly kingship. From this time on, there is no more a king in Israel. Herod, you can take that title king all you want, but you're no more a king of Israel than anybody. He wasn't even an Israelite. He was an Edomite. Did you know that? He wasn't even an Israelite. No more kings in Israel until the true king will come. And Christ did come, and he will come again. He'll take his place on that throne. And so we end this book of Jeremiah on this note of judgment. Does it seem like a downer to you to end on this note of judgment and this finality of Jerusalem being purged and cleansed? Well, I tell you, without the judgment of the wicked, there can be no salvation. Think about that for a second. What is your salvation if the wicked aren't judged and separated? How good can your salvation be if the wicked is still there? Don't they have to be judged and go away? Right? And we see these earthly pictures of this happening. So without this separation of evil from righteousness, there can be no salvation. Judgment is good. That's the point I'm making. Judgment is good. And so we've seen some prototypes of that here in Jeremiah 52. So don't be like Zedekiah and continue in rebellion. Don't be like Nebuchadnezzar and seek retribution above and beyond what God's asked you to do. And don't be like these ungodly leaders that we saw in Judah, in Jerusalem, that were just soaked in religiosity and never truly turned to the Lord. With all of their opportunities, being around the Lord, lots of power and influence, all of these leaders, and yet they couldn't give up their religion just to simply know the Lord. There's a lot of people like that still, right? And then finally, don't be like Jehoiachin, cursed for just repetitive rebellion and actually promoting evil. And I'll tell you what, instead of ending on a downer, let's end like this. Be like Jeremiah. Be like Jeremiah, who rose above the accusations, who every time he tried to be put down, stop saying that. He just came back and said, this is what God told me to say. A couple of times Jeremiah would say, I tried to stop saying it, but my heart burned within me. I had to tell the truth. I had to speak for the Lord. That should be how we act in service to God. To serve God, Jeremiah served the Lord through much adversity, and he sealed his fate. He sealed his fate by serving the Lord, and now he's eternally blessed in paradise forever. What is his short little life on earth compared to the fact? How long has Jeremiah been in heaven now? I mean, 550 BC until now. Time doesn't mean anything, but he's been there a long time. He's been there a long time. He's going to be there a long time more. And I don't think he even cares about the struggle back on earth. It was all worth it because he did it for the Lord. And now look, Lord willing, if we're still here, the next 3 weeks we'll go through the book of Lamentations and we'll look at this cry of Jeremiah at the sight of seeing the city, the people, but mostly the temple destroyed. We'll do that the next 3 weeks. So it's a somber note. The next 3 weeks, it's a somber note. There's no way to sugarcoat that, right? I was thinking that we should tell everybody wear black and no, just kidding. Don't do that. That'd be worse. But maybe we should be like the Jews and just do it all in one day, one session, get it over with. I was actually looking at how some of my friends have taught through this book of Lamentations, and there are many of them that actually just took all 5 chapters in 1 week, because it's the whole time, all 5 chapters, you're thinking about the moment of death. Right? You're focused on that moment of death. But I tell you what, let me give you one last preview of something. You know what the good thing is of considering your own death? You know what the good thing is of Jeremiah considering the death of Jerusalem? You know what the good part is? To know that there is life coming. Because if you just always think about life, you're always thinking, we have life, we're always going to have life. If you don't ever have any of the bad things, you won't appreciate the good things. If you don't ever have a picture of death in your life, you'll never understand the vastness of the good of life to come. And so staring at death for a minute can be good, because then you come away from it and you realize, wow, we've got life ahead of us. And in a way, the destruction of Jerusalem is a picture of death on purpose so that there can be a rebirth, and so that they can get that picture of rebirth and new life. And that's what we have. None of us get to heaven because we have life. We get to heaven because we've gained new life. New life, not this one, the new life in Christ. And so let's not teach Lamentations tonight. Let's stop right there. All right.
You've been listening to Believing the Word, a ministry of author and pastor Dan Shunk at Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Pastor Dan has been teaching through a series in the book of Jeremiah. We'd love to get connected with you and hear about how God is working in your life through this teaching program. You can reach us by phone at 717-500-1102. Again, that number is 717-500-1102. You can also check us out at our website, cchambersburg.org, where you can learn more about the ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg and find our chapter-by-chapter messages. If you're in the Chambersburg area, we'd love to have you join us Sunday mornings and Thursday evenings on 5121 Coffee Avenue. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back with more. But until then, this has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.